Somewhere right now, you are standing in a supermarket aisle, staring at a brightly colored wrapper, negotiating with your own brain. The logical part reviews the calories, the grams of sugar, the promises you made to yourself this morning when you looked in the mirror. The other part, a much older, much louder part, is not reviewing anything. It is screaming to tear the wrapper open and eat the entire thing before anyone else finds it. And somewhere between the guilt and the chewing, a question arrives. One that nobody selling you a meal plan subscription is particularly eager to answer. Why does the most intelligent species in the history of the planet routinely lose arguments with baked goods? We blame willpower. We blame discipline, we blame our genes, our childhood, our stress, ourselves, dutifully, the way people blame themselves for things that are actually someone else's fault entirely. But the real story does not start in a supermarket aisle. It starts about 200,000 years ago, in a world where your brain's obsession with sugar was not a character flaw. It was the only reason any of your ancestors survived long enough to have children. And once you see it, you will never look at a cookie the same way again. Walk into any natural history museum, find the skeletal remains of our prehistoric ancestors, and take a careful look. These people had no gyms, no calorie tracking apps, no registered dietitians arguing on podcasts, no concept of a cheat day, and absolutely no one telling them to move their bodies for 30 minutes 3 times a week. Their fitness routine consisted of not dying. And yet, look at the physical evidence left behind in the dirt. Obesity was nearly absent from the human fossil record for 99% of our evolutionary history. Your Stone Age ancestor had a lean, highly functional physique that modern humans are currently spending thousands of dollars on personal trainers to approximate, with far less impressive results. Something changed. Something changed dramatically, recently, and it was not our genes. And the strangest part? That overwhelming, unreasonable craving pulling you toward the cookie shelf may still be responding to exactly the same forces that kept those ancestors alive. To find the mechanism, you have to understand what sugar actually meant to a prehistoric brain. Not the abstract macronutrient, the survival signal. For 200,000 years, encountering something sweet meant one thing and one thing only: ripe fruit, concentrated calories, energy dense enough to carry you through the next 3 days of unsuccessful hunting, when the alternative was starvation. Your brain evolved a devastatingly effective dopamine response to chase that signal down with everything it had. Finding a wild honeycomb was not a pleasant afternoon treat. It was the rough caloric equivalent of winning a lottery you did not know you had entered, and your brain rewarded you accordingly. Anthropologists estimate that a find like that could represent more usable energy than an entire day of hunting. The craving that descended on you the moment you found it was not greed. It was your brain doing exactly what 200 millennia of evolutionary pressure had trained it to do: locate the calories, consume the calories, and survive the winter. The system worked flawlessly for roughly 199,700 years. Then came the first warning sign, and it arrived much faster than anyone expected. Many people assume that rewiring a deeply entrenched biological system requires thousands of years of selective pressure. Researchers studying compulsive eating behavior found it could happen within days. Animals with perfectly healthy metabolisms, given unlimited access to concentrated sugar, abandoned their natural diets entirely within a week, consumed far beyond any functional need, and showed clear withdrawal symptoms when the sugar was removed, even though nothing in their genetics had shifted by a single base pair. Their environment changed. Their behavior followed immediately. The survival mechanism that had rewarded a rare caloric jackpot once or twice a season was now being triggered hundreds of times per day, And the ancient brain running that mechanism had absolutely no concept of a supermarket, no concept of quarterly earnings targets, no concept of a buy one, get one promotion, and no off switch designed for abundance, because it was still operating on the assumption that the next meal was 3 days of unsuccessful hunting away. It was still doing its job. The job had simply become catastrophic.
Our prehistoric ancestors were not, by any reasonable measure, living comfortably. They were, however, burning calories at a rate that modern life has almost entirely eliminated. From the moment a Stone Age adult left camp in the morning, the day consisted of walking, digging, carrying, climbing, and occasionally sprinting away from things with very large teeth and no interest in negotiating. There were no chairs, no elevators, no vehicles of any description. Their version of a rest day was the day they outran something and did not die. Behavioral ecologists studying modern hunter-gatherer populations have estimated that ancestral sapiens expended somewhere between 800 and 1,200 additional calories per day above modern sedentary baselines, simply through the unavoidable physical requirements of staying alive.
When ancient humans did locate a dense calorie source, honey, ripe fruit, a lucky kill, the energy entered a body running a massive daily deficit and burned almost immediately. The metabolic system had no reason to store aggressively because the conditions that would require aggressive storage, abundance without effort, had never occurred before in the entire history of the species. Then both conditions collapsed simultaneously, and nobody noticed for several thousand years.
The prehistoric diet had a secondary feature that no wellness brand will ever put on packaging. Natural sugars arrived wrapped tightly in fiber, plant cell walls that required real chewing time and genuine digestive friction to break down. That fiber slowed the entire process, releasing glucose gradually over hours rather than flooding the bloodstream in minutes. Biting into a wild apple 200,000 years ago meant working through something roughly the size of a golf ball, sour enough to make your eyes water, requiring several minutes of actual jaw effort to consume. There was no snacking. There was no eating while doing something else. Eating was the thing.
Compare that experience to drinking a large soda, which delivers an equivalent sugar load in about 4 seconds, with zero fiber, zero chewing resistance, and zero meaningful signal to your brain that anything requiring satiety has occurred. Your ancestor spent 6 minutes earning 40 calories from a golf ball apple. You absorb 400 calories from a juice bottle before you have finished reading this sentence. Researchers examining pre-agricultural skeletal populations have documented that markers of metabolic disease were extraordinarily rare before farming. The ancient body, processing sugar the way it evolved to process sugar, slow and hard and wrapped in plant material, regulated itself almost automatically. Not through discipline, through friction. Modern food engineering spent decades systematically removing every last trace of that friction, and then expressed surprise at what happened next.
Then, around 10,000 years ago, sapiens did something that changed everything, and took several millennia for anyone to notice was a problem. We stopped moving to find food and started growing it instead. We planted crops, built granaries, and invented soft boiled grain porridge, which required essentially no jaw effort to consume and delivered refined carbohydrates into a digestive system that had never encountered anything like them before. The Neolithic Revolution tends to get celebrated as the moment civilization began, which it was. It was also, without anyone intending it, the moment the ancient hunger system encountered its first genuine mismatch. The brain that had spent 200,000 years screaming, "Eat everything you find, you have no idea when the next meal is coming," suddenly found itself surrounded by a permanent, reliable grain surplus. And it responded to this new situation with the same wisdom and restraint it had developed for scarcity, meaning none whatsoever. The fiber was gone. The mandatory daily movement was gone. The caloric scarcity that had kept the reward system calibrated was gone. And within a few generations, skeletal evidence begins showing exactly what happens when a body designed for 200,000 years of hard physical scarcity suddenly finds itself swimming in easy calories it has no framework for moderating. Anthropologists studying populations that have recently transitioned to modern diets have found the same metabolic collapse happening within a single generation, far too rapidly to involve any genetic change. The genes were identical. The trigger that regulated them had been switched off. The industrial era did not create this problem. It simply perfected it with impressive efficiency. When 19th century mills began producing ultra-refined white flour and sugar became cheap enough for daily consumption, the last remnants of dietary friction were eliminated from the average plate. A dentist named Weston Price spent years in the 1930s traveling to isolated populations in the Swiss Alps, the Scottish Islands, and across the Americas, documenting the same finding everywhere he went. Communities eating their traditional diets showed lean, metabolically stable bodies. Communities that had recently adopted refined industrial food showed expanding waistlines and cascading health problems within a single generation.
His observations were not controlled clinical trials, and researchers have since debated their methodology. But the general pattern he documented has been confirmed repeatedly by independent work since. The shift was environmental, not genetic. And the food industry, to its considerable credit as a business operation, understood the ancient brain's reward system far better than most of its customers did. The specific combinations of sugar, fat, and salt that now dominate the food supply do not appear anywhere in the natural world. They were engineered, methodically, by people with advanced degrees in food science and very clear quarterly targets to hit the dopamine response hard enough to override every satiety signal your body possesses. Which raises a question your doctor will not bring up in a 15-minute appointment. Not about what to eat, about why you eat it, when you already know you should not.
Here is where the science becomes genuinely contested and the food industry becomes extremely interested in which side wins. They have funded research on both sides, which is exactly as reassuring as it sounds. A growing body of research suggests your hunger and satiety signals do not operate as a simple calorie calculator. They shift dynamically in response to sleep quality, chronic stress, gut microbiome composition, and the neurochemical environment created by what you habitually eat. Some researchers argue that treating only caloric arithmetic while ignoring the reward system driving the behavior is roughly like treating the symptom of a broken leg by giving the patient better crutches and sending them home. Mainstream nutrition science disputes the stronger versions of this argument firmly, noting that energy balance remains the fundamental physical law and cannot be overridden by brain chemistry, which is correct. Both camps have substantial data. The debate is genuinely unresolved. What is not in dispute? The food environment that modern humans navigate every day was not assembled by evolution. It was assembled by companies whose entire business model depends on your ancient brain failing to recognize that the jackpot is no longer rare. We engineered a world so abundant, so processed, and so endlessly convenient that it quietly hijacked our own survival biology and then handed us a prescription for diabetes medication for the trouble. Stable food supply is a real win. The near elimination of famine in wealthy countries is a real win. Nobody is suggesting we return to a diet of tough roots and the occasional lucky mammoth. But we traded the ancient friction that kept the hunger system calibrated for a world where concentrated sugar is cheaper than vegetables and available at every gas station, every airport, and every aisle of every supermarket at 3 in the morning. The craving you feel standing in that aisle is not weakness. It is your 200,000-year-old brain operating exactly as designed, in a world it was never designed for, doing the only thing it knows how to do: Find the calories, take the calories, survive the winter that stopped coming several thousand years ago. The saber-toothed tigers are gone. The dopamine system they trained is still fully operational. And if you want to understand what the science actually suggests about working with that system instead of constantly losing to it, that is the next video. Subscribe so you do not miss it. And drop a comment below with the one food your ancient brain refuses to negotiate about. You are not the only one.